With much better.
Do you want to start? All right.
So welcome to the May meeting of the Gungahlin Community Council. You've probably been aware that Capital Metro is starting to pick up a higher level of interest in the community, partly because one section of the political arena is saying that they don't want to fund it, and also the government has pushed the opportunity for considering the extension of the initial stage to service other areas of Canberra. We find that particularly useful. As one of our concerns was that we didn't want it to be seen as a Gungahlin particular issue, that we were getting everything. We're particularly keen here to see light rail have some attractors for Gungahlin as well, because we don't want it to be seen as a purely transit-oriented service. So we really think that, I think from a perspective of Canberra, it's a great attractor for bringing people to Canberra. But we want, being parochial, we want more attractions here in Gungahlin to make the light rail process, the format it turns out to be far more valuable and cost effective. So I'll now pass across to the CEO and Thomas to give us a briefing on what's happening.
Good evening, everyone. It's great for me to be back out here. I don't know how many of you were here. I think I was out here maybe my very first week on the job last year. So thank you for coming back, and hopefully we'll be able to give you a little bit more information. I think at the moment we're very much in the planning stages of what's a really immense and very exciting project, and everybody always wants to know a lot more. Hopefully I'll give you some more information tonight, but we are getting towards the stage where we're ready to start talking and having much more interactive community sessions as well. And so I have Ben Smith here tonight, who's my comms person, also brand new Gungahlin resident, I might add. And a few of my other team members here who are also Gungahlin residents. So it's great to have them here along too to support me. Just as a quick overview, I know that a lot of people in Gungahlin are probably quite familiar with light rail, but a lot of people ask me what is light rail, and what's the difference between light rail and heavy rail. I think the main difference is light rail tends to interact and operate through an urban environment. Heavy rail tends to move very large quantities of people from one end of somewhere to another and do that in a very efficient big pipeline. It tends to be very segregated from other forms of transport, has fencing along it, and is a much sort of bigger, heavier, massive system. Whereas light rail really does interact with us in our streetscapes. It operates amongst us, it operates through streets where pedestrians are, where cyclists are, and part of its real attraction around the world is exactly for that it really does become part of a community and part of the way that we actually live our lives. They are low floors, so they're very accessible. People often feel like they're much a friendlier form of transport. You don't have to launch yourself up onto stairs or anything to get onto. They are incredibly energy efficient, especially in our environment here in Canberra, where we're going to have such a focus on renewable energy sources. We're hoping to have that as quite a focus for our light rail system. They are very smooth. One of the features where people... Sorry? Yeah, there is an overhead electrical connection. I don't know if I've got a laser here, but that line there that you can see, or you might be able to see.
Yeah, I can't see something.
I know. That's the thing. Wires are actually quite hard to see when there's not lots of them around. And they are quite smooth. So one of the other features that our customers often really like about light rail is that they smoothly take off and fit and stop. And so for people who want to read on a form of transport, often don't get that feeling of motion sickness as they go along. They do have a reasonably high capacity, somewhere between about 200 and 300 passengers, and are used in about over 400 cities in the world, of both big size and quite little sizes. So some of the systems that...
I don't want to be facetious, but
yeah.
With the gauge of the light rail, it's such that vehicles from other cities could use the rail. You wouldn't want to go through different cities.
Oh, there's quite a long story about gauges and rail and how things have changed over time, but light rail is starting to standardise a little bit in terms of its gauge. It is usually a standard gauge kind of setup. So yeah, it's possible. In Adelaide, for instance, we did end up taking some second-hand rail cars from Madrid. So yeah, it's a possible system.
The trains, are they the same trains on service?
No, I don't think so. That's Zaragoza, is it? Is that right? That's the manufacturer of that tram system is called a Spanish company called CAF, and that system I think that's been portrayed there is in Spain. The manufacturer for the Gold Coast Light Rail is Bombardier. So they are slightly different, similar colour.
How many of those systems have you got in Australia?
Of light rail systems.
Those ones there.
Oh, of the actual rolling stock, the tram car itself.
No, the manufacturer of those.
Oh, CAF are in Australia. They've just won a major contract to supply light rail for the Western Sydney extension. So they're providing about 12 tram cars to them. I'm not aware of anywhere else that they've supplied them to in Australia. Here is a bit of a discussion about what's going on in Australia and how much light rail is being considered around the place. You can see nearly every city is considering it in some form at the moment. Gold Coast is about to go live in the next month, and that's a pretty exciting time. Newcastle is considering it. Sydney is doing a big project. They're out to tender at the moment. Us in Canberra, obviously. Melbourne continue to develop and extend their networks. Adelaide just last year released their transport and land use strategy, which included desire to put more light rail systems in around the city. Perth, their system's a little bit on hold at the moment while they work out some of their funding arrangements. Darwin has started to consider. Sunshine Coast, who are actually coming to visit us in the next few weeks to talk about their prospective light rail. Western Sydney and Parramatta have quite a big system that they're looking at to help people move around the western suburbs of Sydney and Hobart. So it pretty much covers nearly every state in Australia. Some of the benefits that we talk about, the top one there, creating jobs, this does have a significant increase, not just on the direct construction jobs in the city, but also the indirect jobs that happen when you start to have light rail being built and constructed. You have that construction workforce, but then there's a lot of ancillary jobs that spring up around it. Sydney's estimating that their light rail will create about 10,000 jobs in the city. Gold Coast estimated about 6,500 jobs, so it's quite significant in terms of the job creation. It does encourage investment, even in some of the very tiniest cities in the world. As soon as the light rail started operating, some of that investment started the very next day. People starting small businesses. I always say everything always seems to start with a coffee shop these days, but that's where it starts and just grows from there. It really does revitalise the city. People start to walk a lot more and ride and start to interact and walk along the streets between places. So that's another one of the benefits that we have. Increased availability, accessibility, connectivity, encourages that more active lifestyle. We know that people walk a lot further to get to light rail stops than they do to get to bus stops. They'll walk about twice the distance, and that's been shown anywhere around the world. And it provides that frequent transport system so that you can have, our aim with all forms of public transport is to be able to do away with timetables, and I think it's a really nice thing to be able to think you can rock up somewhere and have a light rail or have any form of public transport there ready for you to go, and you don't have to worry about whether you're 5 or 10 minutes late because the service is coming through pretty regularly. It does encourage different land use, that's for sure, and a mixed type of land use. So you see a mix of residential, people having jobs in different places along the line, and it's no longer sort of clustered at one end or the other. It does reduce congestion and the pollution point I think I made earlier. The congestion costs are costing Australia a massive amount of money every year, and that's why cities are investing so heavily in their public transport solutions, because the cities are just getting more and more choked. And if you look at Northbourne Avenue, and now that we're along that alignment there, we can see it at various times of the day where it really just congests. And if you think that if you're relying on being able to move around as part of your business, whether you're a tradie or all sorts of people that sort of spend time in their cars during the day, that congestion costs you in time. Yeah.
I was recently in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And, I was riding on there, the trams, just in the city, and it was only on the roads, not in the tracks were off the road. But to be honest, it didn't seem to be like you're saying.
Well, Melbourne.
People had to walk across the road to get out to the train stop, so the traffic was stopped for that. I'm not, I don't want to be negative, but I don't really see it as being as attractive as the story.
Yeah.
Do you have any comment about why people are prepared to walk twice the distance to a train stop rather than bus?
There's a lot of stories about why and a lot of research. It's not just a story. It's not. There have been plenty of research articles on that. But I think people have generally a greater confidence. They know that the rail line is fixed, that they know exactly where it's going to. They know it's regular. So people do. They will often bypass other forms of transport to do that. And I guess Melbourne will feel a little bit different when you come from Canberra. But I think certainly in Melbourne the demographics that use the light rail in the middle of the day are often people who no longer take their cars between meetings because they just don't want to fight all of that congestion and traffic. They want to just get from point A to point B, be able to do something on their iPhone or their smart tablets while they're doing it. And they really have, it may seem just busy in general, but there are a lot of people using that system and using it instead of using their vehicles. Activating city centres. We should have city centres on here because Gungahlin is part of this activation as well. I was looking very ambitiously at the scene coming up, so it's beautiful. But the terminus, particularly the termini points, really do activate those city centres and have people, that may now spend a little bit more time as they get off public transport to spend time within those cities, walk through them where they have to places of employment. So you can really expect a different energy level in the city centres. Property values, I think we've already seen a little bit of this sort of discussion. I saw one of the property developers in the paper not so long ago who picked up some land in Gungahlin who was talking about part of its attractiveness as being close to the light rail. There's some numbers up there, but even in Sydney, only in the last few months, they opened their western extension to their light rail. And the light rail properties along that area were going up in excess of 20% beyond what Sydney was already escalating to. So it certainly had a very immediate impact in Sydney on property prices. So, stage 1 route. You guys probably know this pretty well. We haven't moved that line around for a while. So that's kind of where it looks at the moment. I guess, what does it mean for you at the moment? I think that there's so much potential here, both in terms of the retail uplift, but also Ewan was sort of pointing to before what other attractions exist here. You've got the movie cinemas projected to come.
I want to comment about retail.
Yeah.
You talk about young people out of Gungahlin to City Hall. This is where this light rail finishes. Well, wouldn't that have a detrimental effect on the retail in Gungahlin, where you've got a massive canvas centre, you've got large picture theatres, you've got more restaurants, you've got more of a variety. Wouldn't that have a detrimental effect on
I think what you'll find is people are already going to those centres anyway. I think what it gives us is the opportunity for both ends, for people to be coming from the city out to Gungahlin.
Why would somebody come from the city to Gungahlin?
To go to the magnificent swimming pool for a start.
Well, they pass the swimming pool.
Well, but maybe not.
Magnificent.
Yeah, not magnificent. It is pretty nice.
Can we keep moving through the content just so that we get to the end and then perhaps have some questions? Because
Sure.
unless you're happy to
Sorry.
keep taking it.
Some of the design considerations that we think about when we start working through this, and this is the sort of the phase that we're in at the moment, is what does the patronage look like? And we've done a bunch of different modelling, and we're continuing to do that modelling because that's very important for us to understand that and get that right. How does traffic management work? How do we make sure that cars and light rail and bikes can all move around each other? How do we make sure that the stops are accessible? How do people know that there's a stop there? Sometimes this seems to be pretty hard to tell in some of the cities around the world. They're a little bit discreet. What are the space requirements for the light rail? How can we make sure it can get around easily? How can it turn corners particularly? One of the type turns that people may have noticed is from Flemington Road onto Northbourne. That's probably one of our tighter turns in terms of the design. The connectivity to the bus and the bike and the walking paths, it's very important, particularly in Gungahlin, that we connect the buses so that people can step off the light rail, get onto their bus, go towards whichever suburb that they're living in, and make that trip as seamless as possible. Proximity to parking, we expect that park and ride will be very popular, especially at this end of the route, and so that's one of our design considerations as well, how do we make that the most effective. And then proximity to some of those future developments, how do we make sure that we support and help some of the future developments that are penciled in for Gungahlin at the moment. Some of the key design considerations, and we don't have answers for these yet, but I think these are things that it's good for you to know what we're thinking about. Particularly Hibberson Street, as you come into the town centre, is quite narrow, and if we're to run light rail along that, we need to think about how we do that safely in an environment that has a lot of people in it, and at the moment has cars parked along it. So that's one of the sort of considerations for us at the moment. The other one is this roundabout. Light rail can deal with roundabouts, but we prefer not to. So at the moment we're thinking about what other options we might have there, and whether in France they have quite a lot of roundabouts with light rail going through them, and they generally end up with some kind of weird signals on the side of the roundabout so they can still get around them. But we're thinking, maybe that there's some other options there that might mean a signalisation of that intersection, or something to make that more safe for everybody who are travelling through it. But they're the sorts of considerations when we're starting to look at the design of just how we can fit the light rail into the environment that we have here. In terms of the operations are generally we run based on a 10-minute frequency. That may be more frequent during the peak hours when we're looking at having quite significant patronage rise during that time. The capacity is probably going to be around 200, but sometimes that doesn't get defined until towards the end of the project when people are bidding for things, because we don't want to overly define what someone might bid in terms of their rolling stock that they have available around the world. Our target running time is somewhere around 25 minutes. We'd like to do a little bit better than that. I think you can all imagine how that needs to work with our light priority system down Northbourne Avenue particularly. That's one of the areas that we're concentrating on in this phase of our design, to understand how we can keep that running time for light rail very quick. And the running times are driven by a few things. One is the number of stops. So it's very common for everyone to want to stop near their house and then not stop at all anywhere else, and we've got to be able to balance that with the needs of everyone along the line. The traffic light numbers, our ability to avoid congestion, so not be on the road as much as possible. Like that example you said in Melbourne, where tram cars are often in the middle of the road and sharing the road with other traffic. The light phasing, and then the loading times. So one of the other beauties of light rail is, unlike a bus where you have a door at one end, you can have up to 6 doors along a side, and they all just open and everyone just steps on. And then when you get off at the other end, they all just open and everyone steps off. So they have really quick loading and unloading times that enable us to keep that transport form moving along all the time. That's really important. Some of the passenger experience features that I've talked about a little bit before, but low floors. We're getting better in our technology at being able to have full accessibility from the platform side, and try and minimise that gap as much as possible, so people who are requiring mobility devices can get on and off the light rail as quickly and easily as possible. The reliability of the light rail system is very important too. When you're running a service that people are relying on to be every 10 minutes, it doesn't take much for that. If the system is broken in some way, then you might end up having quite a frustrating moment where you're waiting for much longer for something. They are fairly smooth. The other thing about light rail is they can stop quite quickly. So unlike heavy rail, you will have seen safety issues where a heavy rail train can take somewhere up to 1 kilometre to stop when it's at speed. Light rail can stop quite quickly, and has that benefit and that's one of the other benefits to it when it's operating in quite an urban environment from a safety perspective. the real-time service and the information that Action are looking at putting through at the moment, we're looking at joining together with that so that people can have as much of a seamless journey as possible. So the idea is, you can look up at a various set of information and know when your bus is going, know when the next tram is coming, and have that sort of customer experience going on. Wi-Fi should be available quite freely. We just put it on in Adelaide before I left there, and it ended up being a very popular service. People, especially kids that don't end up with very expensive phone plans, love to get on and hook up to the free Wi-Fi and do what they do on the way to uni or work. So that is something that we hope to provide as part of the customer experience. And the other thing is integration with the MyWay system. I think it would be probably unreasonable for people to carry around a series of different public transport tickets and try and use the system. So that's one of the things that we're looking at the moment, and how that passenger experience integrates together so people don't feel like they're on Mars and then the moon when they're trying to use public transport. There's just a few pictures of life around light rail. This probably doesn't represent Melbourne when you were there the other day because there's no people on this street. Must have been taken early on a Sunday morning. But I guess what it means to sort of demonstrate is really that they do operate in very nice pedestrianised environments where people walk across it, people interact. People generally are, we've got to give ourselves credit. We're pretty clever as a race, so we should be able to keep out of the way of some of these things. But they do get used to operating in that environment, and everybody operates quite cohesively together, and it produces a really nice streetscape. And it's happening a lot more around the world. This is the Zaragoza system again, and this is a bit where it is actually wire-free. The system can operate wire-free for a small part of the city centre. Brand new technology, hasn't been tested very well, but it's in test at the moment, so we'll see how that goes in Spain. This is Orléans in France, quite a small city. See, it's travelling again through quite a pedestrianised area, people interacting again in the inner city streets. And again, that city is probably only between 300 and 500,000 people. Nice in France, a nice sort of open place. That wasn't like that to begin with. I think Nice is when they built the light rail, as part of their design, they actually shut the cars out of the main city centre. So they actually had quite a big urban change for the people there, but it's become quite a big meeting place for people now and has really changed the use of that city centre. We often get asked about cost, and I think everyone's rather impatient to hear if there's any change to the numbers that have been put out there. It's really important to us to understand enough of the design to do that properly. I think projects can go pretty badly if we start to give out costs willy-nilly left, right and centre without really understanding what's in there. And obviously the better we understand the design, the better we can do that. So it's something that we're pretty focused on getting right and making sure that we have the right sort of thing. But in terms of that, we are looking at our procurement model. Some people may have heard the term PPPs. That's a private partnership arrangement where organisations group together to do the construction, the maintenance and the operations, and put in a bid for a period of time. Sometimes these concession times last for 20, 15, 30 years. So that's one procurement method that could be used for this project. The other procurement method is you break all those pieces up and divide them all up and buy them separately. So we need to look at what's best in terms of value for money for the government over the whole life cycle of the light rail operating, and we're in that sort of phase at the moment, having a look at what might be there. We've spent a lot of time engaging with the market. It's very important that we have people to bid on this project. There are lots and lots of projects, as I showed you before, going on in Australia. Melbourne has just been given $27 billion of infrastructure money. Sydney is spending a whole heap of money on infrastructure. And we in Canberra will compete with those same people. So it's important that they're interested in our project and that we have people to compete and bid properly for the project to, again, give us our best value for money. And we are speaking with the other people who do light rail around the country, making sure we learn their lessons and understand what works and what hasn't worked for them over time. So they're sort of our key activities in that area at the moment. This probably might be a little bit hard to see, but I think you're going to put this presentation up on the website anyway, That gives you a bit of a view as to what we're up to. At the moment, we're in that light rail design sort of phase, just starting to have a look at some of the key elements. The delivery model selection, which I talked about, and then we'll move into tendering. The tendering processes take quite a long time for these projects. They're quite complicated. There's a lot of technical detail that goes backwards and forwards. So we've allowed ourselves, for a pretty reasonable amount of time, but that's kind of benchmarked with other big projects around the place and how long they've been seen to close and get construction underway by the middle of 2016. I'm going to hand over to Ben because we are sort of just winding ourselves up to start having some conversations about some things. I think a lot of people are quite sceptical that we make a lot of decisions and then you guys just get to come and point at things and go, we don't like that, and then we do them anyway. We are at a stage of our design where we can make changes to it, and so it is important to us to really understand some of the input around that, and then we can talk about the process for that.
Right. Thanks, Emma. So probably the first thing to point out is tonight actually we've got some focus groups running. So what we wanted to do as one of our early communication activities is do a whole bunch of research to understand what people know, what they understand, what they'd like to hear about, what people see as the issues, so that we can actually communicate with that in mind. It's very easy to get caught on our side of things and make big assumptions, but we're hoping to get some really interesting input from that market research. So the results of focus groups and survey and that sort of thing will come back to us in June. So it'll give some great intel moving forward. We're building our social media profile. We know that's quite a big deal these days in terms of interacting with big groups, and I guess we're trying to keep a running profile of what we're doing through our social media platforms and really connecting with common thinking, not just around Canberra but around the world as well. So Emma spoke before about early designs coming out, and we're just doing a little bit of work with some design elements that we've recently received, and we're looking to take those out to consult and engage with the broader community throughout June and July. So very shortly we're hoping to start promoting that, and we'll be looking at some sort of more meaningful in-depth sessions alongside some an engagement hub that we'll build on our website. So we'll put a lot of rich content up on there, and we'll do, I guess, all the traditional things as well. So we're really interested in, I guess my goal is always building ownership and understanding of the project. So community events is a really big thing for us. You will see us around from time to time, down the road, and we'll be talking with you about the best spots to be in terms of interaction and I guess catching people when they've got a bit of time. But there's we'll be on the lookout for community events that we can sort of partner and partake in those, so that we can help people to understand the project through those. We do a lot of these briefings, as you'd imagine. We've covered a lot of the community councils. We're going back to Woden and Western Creek shortly, and we'll be looking to do a fair bit of branding and education. So some of that branding will be just along the corridor, identifying where the light rail will be, so people sort of driving through that way can gain some recognition. The other side of this point is the education program. So I've always enjoyed doing a lot of work with schools and tertiary institutions, and later this year we'll be doing a design competition with the Australian Institute of Architects that will run a design comp with schools, and they'll be designing parts of our light rail system, which will be very exciting. And library rollout, there is information here. We'll be looking to build out more across the library network. And the most important thing that I always find is that these are the things that we identify. We're very keen to hear from anyone here, anyone across the membership, about what are the good opportunities for us to sort of get out there and educate and engage, because those opportunities are, in my experience, the highest value ones. So, Yeah, great. So this is actually something that you know it's probably has a bit more of a focus in the other parts of the city that we go to, because they want to understand, you know, when they might be getting the light rail out there, and what sort of planning process is going on to identify the next arms and legs in the network. So there is in a different part of government, in the Environment and Sustainable Development Department, they've actually recently brought a company on board to help them to plan the master plan, and they'll be looking to do consultation around September this year. So in terms of our ongoing engagement, we'll be doing a lot of work with them, working very closely. But you know, I guess the idea around this is that we're focused on delivering stage one, but these things gain real momentum once you put them as part of a network. And it's similar, say, if you look at the Gold Coast right now. I worked on stage one up there. It's about to start operating. There's already a lot of momentum talking about stage two, and stage two will be, you know, one of 4 or 5 across a 40k network. So, you know, there'll be a similar consideration for Canberra. And the great thing is, based on the way the city's designed, there's a lot of open corridors that really, you know, were intended for rail, and you know, we're happy to see that sort of come into fruition now.
I think it's really important, because a lot of people, particularly in Gungahlin, might say, "Oh, we're already, you know, doing our phase of the light rail system." But I think it's important when the consultation happens for light rail master plan to talk to people about where you'd like it to go from Gungahlin. Do you need it to go across the lake into the Parliamentary Triangle, to Barton, to the airport? There's some of the considerations for you here as to what an extension to the light rail route might mean from stage 2, and how convenient it would make the system even more so than it is today. I think is that the last slide?
Yep.
Oh, yes, it is. We're happy to take some questions.
I was at the table, and some of my things I haven't been involved in community council national meeting, but speaking as a private individual. I looked at the census 2011, and in that census it indicated that of the population of, let's say, 350,000, 177,000 travelled somewhere around Lake Griffin. So I thought we were rather the second comment I want to make is that in the last 30 or 40 years, Canberra transport plans have tried to do it right, and they failed miserably on all fronts. And one of the reasons they failed is they stuck to this idea of the white plan. And the white plan was brilliant when this town was much smaller, and intercity connections like Wyoming to the sea were terrific, and then going out to the common. But this one may just take a page out of the transport Canberra plan. In here, it makes one of the goals for public transport is to design the public transport network to be genuinely competitive with car traffic. And in fact, we put in, for network 14, we put a submission to that. The argument has always been along the lines that, oh, we're going to enough people, enough buses on to get people from A to B.
Right.
When I was travelling to Russell each day, a few years ago, the journey took something like 50 minutes or something like that to get there. And we had to go through 3 suburbs to do it.
Right.
And I said, this is enough. If you're going to compete with the car, wouldn't you take the same route that the car takes? And therefore, and I quote from very recently, 12th of May, Kirsten Bloom, major focus on transport. The requirements for future light rail implementation were considered during the planning of the road bus interchange. There's a whole lot of that, but basically we're saying, well, we're going to go through Wyoming, and then we're going to go from Wyoming down to Tuggeranong. You know, the average Joe doesn't travel that way. He doesn't look for the hard route to get. He goes straight down to Drake to drive in the south state of Tuggeranong and goes around Parkway and into the city from there. I've been, I'm in favour of what I have to say. I don't know about this town because I think it's too small. But I have travelled on it in Amsterdam and in Munich, and I think it's terrific. You know, a wonderful sized town to support it. And my question is not so much about supporting it in terms of with it financially, but really, can we get people on board? Because we said, my trip for in both of those cities, they change go slow. I stop at every traffic light, or I'll be also on the white road in Singapore too, and they go up on elevated platforms to get to the.
Yeah.
And I know they find traffic lights to suit the inbound traffic flow, but they still take a long time to get there because you're stopping so often. Well, my question is, how do you overcome that? Do you think the community conservation people, this government has had 30 years to improve on, don't stop, they keep going.
Keep going.
Don't stop.
There's a few questions in that light. The car one is an interesting one. The examples of the cities you gave are quite old cities and Adelaide is another example of an older city where the light priority systems weren't done at the same time as the light rail was built. So in Adelaide, for instance, which I'm more familiar with the statistics for, the light rail spent about 27% of its time stopped at traffic lights, which is not good for its overall journey time. Still very popular, people still like to take it. What the more modern systems do, and I know they were trying for this with the Gold Coast, and we'll certainly explore this for us as well, is that that the tram actually triggers the lights before it actually leaves off. So the light, you're not actually waiting for the lights, you're not just doing a priority system for all the traffic, but you're doing that priority system for both pedestrian crossings. So as a tram approaches the pedestrian crossing, will allow people to cross so that people can obviously cross safely instead of doing a runner. And also as it takes off, it's not, it doesn't take off and then stop at the next red light. So that's kind of how the modern systems work, and they work quite successfully around France in that fashion, and in the US as well. The US, which is a very car basis of society, the light rail systems have managed to do that very well. So we do need to consider that and think about it. With respect to the Y plan and public transport systems, I think what most cities are trying to do today, and where they're migrating to with their public transport that they feel is the most successful, is to build a fast spine and then feed services into it. So you're not making that progression around all the cities and all the sort of suburbs and trying to pick up everybody and still try and get to the city at the same time, or to Tuggeranong or wherever else. So I think that's the aim with looking at the light rail master plan or any of the public transport system, without trying to talk for ESDD, who you've already been in touch with. I'm sure Christian would say the same thing. But ultimately, and we're not the only city trying to do that, but I think everyone's decided that really is the most efficient, because it makes people move faster. It means that you're not stopping in as many spots or trying to pick up everyone on the same service. And I think for Gungahlin, one of the challenges for us is to work with action, so we get a really successful system in doing that, so people aren't sitting there waiting for long periods of time for services. In terms of rail cars, we're still working out that number, but it's probably around 15 mark, I guess. We haven't worked that out. Some people might come to us and offer that with a far fewer, so it's something that really can't be quoted on at the moment.
Yeah.
This question is, I'm looking at how you're working at 9 and 6 there. And I was there when they actually started doing the Autobahn.
Yeah, the Autobahn.
Is it the Autobahn?
The Autobahn.
I always get on that stuff. That system just amazes me. It is such a brilliant system, and why would that system suit Canberra? Because you've got those long open spaces, you've got long distances to cover. Those buses in Adelaide, I'll just explain, they start off as normal buses in the city centre so they can get around. Then they go onto a concrete track, and they've got little feelers on the side, like little bus antennas, and they stick on that concrete pathway, and it goes out to
Tea Tree.
Gully, and 100 kilometres an hour, and it's so fast. It takes you like 20 minutes to go to the kilometres. It's just right there in a second. It's just amazing. And they run constantly, and at the end, or 2 points on the street, they have a great big car park area, and that to me would be fantastic. Yeah. They've never considered that system.
I think that they are in amongst all of that. Light rail is not the only solution for everything, and I think that's really important for people to understand that you don't just smack light rail everywhere and say that's what we want because it's fancy and that's what flavour of the moment. But the difference between the two systems is buses like that, there's no stopping points or very few along the way, and it really is about just moving people very quickly from one end to the other. Whereas light rail is used more in areas like Northbourne Avenue, where you have, and up in Gungahlin, where you have a lot of land along the corridor, that you really want to help generate the economic benefits at the same time. So, you know, if you're just moving along a highway, for instance, you wouldn't see many light rail systems just moving along the middle of a highway, because that's kind of not really what their purpose is. And you would see far more busways, like in Brisbane, to do the big highway work and just take people from one end to the other. The reason the O-Bahn was really great. It's one of the first busways in Australia, and you know, Adelaide did a good job with that. But it was very expensive. It still is rather expensive to maintain because of the way it's propped up on its stilts. It's kind of like on a big long bridge, if you like. And it was great that Adelaide made the, you know, kept all that land free basically through the back blocks of all of those suburbs. But they've struggled to even extend that now, just in the way that it works and operates.
I was in service over in school, you couldn't do that. And they were practicing with the right line. My record looks for capacity, doesn't include capacity. If that's what we're going to do in this scenario, do it. But I was listening to a guy on the radio, so-called elected representatives, and he said that if they look into the government, they're going to turn on public. Now, what guarantees do we have? I mean, it's not their money, and they treat it as their money, it's spending our money. What guarantees do we have that if anything like that gets in there, that we won't have all the money, the good money that we're spending now on this fantastic project, the fantastic infrastructure for the ACT? What guarantees do we have that that money is going to pass the lock in?
I think, you know, the current government's view is, and you know, their remit to me is, we need to get this built or started, the construction started before the next election. We certainly need to be under contract by that time. So, you know, that's something that we're working towards. But there are no guarantees with anything, as we've seen changes of government at both federal and state levels. I think the aim for me is to make the system usable, well understood, so that people really do say to their elected representatives, hey, we really want this. We want it to stay here.
One last part of that is if we could take it as if we had some federal student, and if we achieve some federal student in the project, then they can do that. What are we pursuing? Because I know that Surface had federal student, Adelaide had it, and I know Norfolk had a federal student.
Well, I think part of it is the current philosophy from the federal government is that public transport systems aren't well supported as infrastructure. You see most of the expenditure in the current budget is about roads. I think there was one major rail project which was out the Inland Rail, which is the plate rail line. So their statement currently is that they believe that rail systems and public transport systems are for states to fund, and for the federal government it's for roads. So that's just the philosophy at the time that we're in. We're still working on that based on different scenarios, so it's really hard to give an exact number, but in the peak, we're certainly seeing full 200-car light rail trams every 5 minutes over a 2-hour period. So, yeah.
You can focus on the PPP model, and a lot of things now being placed on Avenue. What sort of influence might Capital Metro play on getting similar sort of developments out here, given that Glenville Road area is almost complete in terms of developments? We see there was a real need for some positive planning. The other end of the township, which would be mainly the public commercial. How much influence can you bring to get something solid and useful for Dungarvan as well as help fund the project.
It probably does feel like that. We actually are talking about uplift of the corridor along the whole length of the corridor, so we're not talking about it just for the city, just for Northbourne, but we are interested in what benefits it can bring along the whole route. And certainly one of the things, it's likely to be a mixed development out here, commercial and residential as well, and we're really keen to see more of that. I think that there's a lot of people watching at the moment to just see whether light rail, gets to its next phases before they commit. But I think that we're seeing just a general level of higher interest, and we'd like to continue to see things like pool and things that draw people here as much as somewhere else. And we've got Epic that gets sitting in the middle as well, and I think there'll be a lot of discussion around what that is and what it should be. But I think again, things that draw big crowds that people can really participate in are the sorts of events and activities that really light rail does very well. In Adelaide, again, the light rail was extended to go to the entertainment centre, and so a lot of people don't take their cars to the entertainment centre, they'll park somewhere else and then take the light rail through, and it means that when they get out of a big show and there's loads of people, they can just get on the light rail and it will feed them along, so that they don't have to sit in those car parks waiting to get out of a big event. So they are the sort of things that generally, we can have some influence over, but I think the community has more of an influence over that as well. Once they start realising what they can do around light rail and how they can attract people, you'll find that certainly those who are in business make the most of that.
So we haven't got a rough idea of the county terminal cost from
not beyond what's been published so far.
There are maps showing the proposed stops.
Yeah, the proposed stops, we've had a bit more of a think about those, and they're particularly ones that we want to get out soon when we talk about our consultation, just to talk with people about where the engineers have had a look at putting them, and getting some ideas from the community about what that means to them. Is that really in the right spot? Is it better somewhere further up or further down? Often we have people who will say, I want it closer to my house. So we've got to balance that across everyone. But yeah, that's one of the things that we are pretty open to that. We are trying to limit the overall number of stops. Steve, have you got that number in your head? It's like 11. Yeah, 13.
It's 13.
Yeah, so that's kind of the number. We don't want to get too much more than that because we end up pushing out that travel time. But where they are is, really up to all of us.
I suppose the next interesting phase is going to be quarter 4 of this year. We have design of the system, options for food and
yeah, I think we'll have a little bit more excitement when Ben and the team come out and do a little bit of consultation and we start to talk about some of the design features that we've started to look at already. I think that'll get it'll get people a lot more close to what this actually is, because I think there's been a lot of talk at the high level about light rail and everyone's kind of like, okay, yes, that's great, but what is it now? What is it actually going to look like for us? And we're really keen to start talking about it.
So you do have to start construction going off the screen.
Oh, we haven't worked that through yet. That's part of what we need to do. But they generally take between 2 and 3 years to construct. I'd like to keep it as minimal as possible so we can get it quicker.
When would you like to come back?
I'll come back and talk to you guys anytime, you know that. So if there's any questions, please feel free to feed them through to the office. We'll be trying to get back to everyone. And we'll try and keep you as informed as possible, but if there's things that are bugging you or things you can't understand or things that you think we should be looking at in particular, then please get in touch.
Is that one on the desktop?
Now for something completely different.
Yeah,
I'd like
the,
to pass
the
to
PDF on the desktop.
LDA to
Cool.
give us an update on Crosby, our long way to the suburb north of North Park Drive and north on Stacey.
And you're on the desktop there, right?
While still loading, I'll introduce ourselves. My name is Stacey Quell. I'm the project manager for Crosby with the Land Development Government. Last November, we engaged Brown Consulting in association.
Thank you.
So last November, we engaged Brown Consulting in association with Tate Waddington to prepare the estate development plan for Crosby. So they're doing the planning and the engineering associated with that. And what we'll do tonight is run you through what planning has been done today, both by Environment and Sustainable Development Directorate, by ourselves, our preliminary planning, and what we've been finding about the site, the key issues, and how that has informed a preferred option for Crosby. This is the beginning of our process of information sessions for the community. We're following up tomorrow afternoon with a public drop-in session here in this room from 5 till 7, and then again on Saturday from 11:30 to 1:30. I'll hand over to our team. They're hiding behind me. We have Philip Bellard from Brown Consulting and Roger Griffiths sitting down, who's might be able to answer some of the engineering type questions, and Abelia Tate from Tate Waddington, who's doing the urban design and planning aspects of the development.
Thank you, Stacey. As Stacey said, my name is Philip Bellard. I'm from Brown Consulting. I'm an engineer, and I'm not going. The engineering, of course, is the most interesting thing, and I'm sure it's what you're all interested in. But I won't bore you tonight with too many technical details, and primarily the presentation tonight is about planning and what's informed the planning to date for Crosby, and I'll get Julia in a minute to come up and lead us through the planning that was done today. So just very quickly, because I'm sure you are all familiar with where Crosby is. Crosby is on the northern side of Horsebuck Drive. It's relatively long and narrow. It's about 3 kilometres from the bottom to the top. And it's running from Well Station Drive down here up to Anthony Rolfe, the northern end over there. It's approximately, well, it's just over 100 hectares, and there'll be just over 1,000 dwellings on the site. And yeah, so not intending to go into any details on previous studies and reports that have been done, but just to acknowledge that there are a lot of existing reports already been prepared that relate to Crosby, and a lot of studies that have already been done. There's existing site investigation reports, infrastructure service reports, environmental, heritage, tree surveys, geotechnical, bushfire. The Gungahlin Strategic Assessment, which is a very important document in terms of informing the area of the estate. Structure plan review, Horseback Drive, intersections and duplication, and a recent report done by Tate Waddington's on Crosby design elements. So these existing reports have formed the background of what's brought the estate to where it is today, and we're moving on from those reports, so to speak, and demonstrating today what has informed the planning that we've been doing. So just to give you some key dates, obviously we've started consultation tonight. That's part of our consultation process that's happening this month. The intention is to lodge the estate development plan next month, hopefully, which will be followed by the DA application. We will commence detailed design straight away after that, with the intention to start construction on the first stage of the estate in early next year. And if you want to buy a block, hopefully it's available for you by the end of next year. All going well. So I'll just hand over to Abelia now, who's our town planner.
Thanks,
that wonderful plan.
No worries. So this is the structure plan, which is the current statutory document. You can see that the site is, there's a few dog legs in it. This here you can probably see is the new estate boundary. So this is the new boundary that came out of the Gungahlin Strategic Assessment.
where the environmental strategy was set down for Gungahlin, and the Throsby area has been reduced greatly in size. Nevertheless, the sort of general principles of a central road along which things happen is still being applied in our master planning work within the smaller site boundary that we have. So I'll just take you through some of the analysis that we've done, get you a bit familiar with the site, and then talk you through the current master plan. Mulligan's Flat Nature Reserve is to the north of our site, and we have Guru to the east. And linking those are the proposed future nature reserves. So essentially we will have a big continuous nature reserve right along the eastern boundary of our site. To the north we have the future district playing fields, which will service the wider Gungahlin area. And then we have the Gungadera Creek Open Space Network, which feeds down through Harrison, crosses Flemington Road, and then into Franklin. We have Gungadera Creek, which is a major watercourse, runs all the way down to Lynham. We're at the top end of that creek line. And we also have the schools which are located in Harrison down here, which are close to us. And at the moment there's talk about another P to 10 school going into Kenny in the future, but I don't believe that's got any certainty at the moment. We have this great big sort of arterial road that runs along our western boundary and really is a barrier for our site to the facilities that are in the wider Gungahlin. And three major intersection points, Anthony Rolfe, Mableton Avenue, and Wells Station Drive. This is the sort of shared networks path as it exists. This is mapping the current systems within the open space that we will be trying to feed people into. And then the shared network paths within Gungahlin on our western boundary that we'll also be trying to feed our suburb into. And this is just showing the current loop bus route that loops from Gungahlin Town Centre. At the moment there's talk about looping a future bus route through the suburb of Throsby, but also a frequent bus network along Horse Park Drive. And obviously we have light rail proposed along Flemington Road, which is only about 1.2 kilometres from the centre of our site. So it's not inconceivable that people will walk Flemington Road to get to the light rail, or indeed ride their bikes or drive their cars and park them around. This is just showing a 800 metre walking circle, which typically takes about 10 minutes for someone to walk. So it's about a 30-minute walk from one end of our site up to the other end of the site. It is a very long ski site, 3 kilometres in length, as Philip said. The site is quite elevated and you do have spectacular views, generally from all points of the site, and we'll be looking to capture those within our master plan. It's a summary of one of those. Just to talk about some of the interface conditions. Along our eastern boundary to this open space, we will have an outer asset protection zone. So to the north, it's a 200 metre wide outer asset protection zone. And then we have the 50 metre running right down our eastern boundary.
So outer asset protection zone.
Outer asset.
That's an open space you can't develop to protect the environment.
No, it's about bushfire protection.
What? Okay.
So
it's not a term like
sorry, I presume you were. So it's about bushfire protection.
Right.
So within that zone, you maintain vegetation levels to a certain level. So when the fire front comes through, it slows down. And then that goes along with an inner asset, which is maintained to an even higher level, so that by the time the fire front hits the residents, it's under control. Is the feel. Along our western boundary, we have the high pressure gas line that many of you will be familiar with, that then crosses and runs through Gungahlin. It has two zones associated with it, a 120 metre wide so-called kill zone. So if there's an explosion, you will die within that zone. And then additional to that is an 80 metre main zone. So if you're in that additional 80 metres, you will be maimed. This is not an unusual situation. It does occur right through Gungahlin at the moment. So it's just something that we have to deal with. But it does mean that within this zone, we are only putting low density housing. We aren't putting community facilities, areas of congregation and that sort of thing. So it's only about low density housing. And then, of course, we have the noise from Horse Park Drive. It is an arterial road, and we will have to deal with that noise because that hits our site in some way. And then finally, this area here is a sensitive interface with known superb parrot nesting trees, where we need to treat that interface sensitively with that noise and light in particular. And then finally, the natural features of the site. The site does have a large number of significant trees or existing trees on it. So there has been a tree assessment done, and we're using that to inform our master planning work. We're very conscious of trying to maintain as many trees on the site as we can, particularly for the superb parrot. And they do have flight corridors down along Gungadera Creek through our site at the moment, so we're trying to maintain as many mature trees as possible. There is a Aboriginal heritage site that will be retained in place, that's been through the appropriate processes, determined it will retain in place. And the way we've been advised to treat it is that essentially it's kept in open space, it's not marked in any way. So we're not trying to draw people to it, we're actually trying to keep people away from it. And then this is showing topography. Green is 0 to 5%, which is essentially flat. It's a very flat site, except for down in this portion here where we're getting grades up to about 15%, which is sort of relatively steep and not what they're getting out in Denver Prospect. So the first phase that we went through was a so-called design elements phase. This is the plan that was produced, and it was our preliminary master plan, if you like. From that, we did a range of consultation with government stakeholders, including individuals who work for the ODA and provide some design advice. And we've now moved on from that. Now I'll just talk you through some of the key design generators. As I said, our site is very cut off from the facilities that people are going to want to use. And we really have 4 connection points. 3 of them are going to be 4-way signalised intersections. And then we have 1 underpass that connects into that Gungadera corridor that I talked to you about, which we see as a conduit for people to cycle and walk up along. So what we're trying to do is funnel cyclists and pedestrians to those 4 connection points. And we can use different views and vistas to make that a meaningful experience. So we've picked up on Sammy's Hill, and we've got Old Joe sitting back here, which is significant rises within the open space. And we're trying to make meaningful view corridors so people can orient themselves within our estate. And then we have these waterways, which are pleasant places to walk along. So we have Gungadera Creek, and we have a secondary creek line that we're going to try and make something of. We have these existing trees that I talked about. So obviously we can't retain every tree on the site. We have to get some residential development in there somehow. But we're trying to maintain clusters in meaningful pocket parks and meaningful open spaces. In particular, Gungadera Creek, which is the flight path for the superb parrot. But then other pocket parks, which will have existing trees and be co-located in some way with residential development. We have a couple of key land uses. One of them is a 5-hectare community facility site. It's anticipated that that will probably be aged care, but it could be another community facility use. And we also have a mixed-use site, which will have the potential for up to 1,000 square metres of retail commercial. So 1,000 square metres is not a lot, it's sort of like 2 corner shops. It's just a local shop for the residents of Throsby if someone deems that that's a viable proposition. And then we also have the visitor centre. Do you want to talk to me about the visitor centre? So the visitor centre is proposed to be a gateway to the nature reserve. It's an education facility. The Mulligan's Flat Board, I think, have grand visions for the visitor centre that it really will become a great attractor, not only for the residents of the ACT, but the residents of Australia. They sort of talk about it being equivalent to the Arboretum in terms of its, scale and gravitas. So this is the site that they have selected. It's at the valley. You sort of look up into the nature reserve. We are simply providing the site, and then in the future, the visitor centre may come along and be located there. But it has potential to be a great attractor for Throsby as well. So the central road system then basically weaves its way through these key structures that we've set up for the estate. And it's picking up a number of the view corridors. So we have the 2 view corridors here in the northern sector. And then these roads here, each one draws a major alignment up to that hilltop. Really help you orient yourself and understand where you are within the estate. And we see that what we're trying to do is make the pedestrian cycle lines as direct as possible, but the cars can sort of take a bit longer if you like. It's really about prioritising pedestrians and cyclists. Let's fix that. So this is the current master plan as it stands. So it has all of those features that I just talked you through. This sort of pink mustardy colour on the screen is a low-density residential development. So it is essentially a low-density residential estate, 80% of it, about 800 dwellings. But there are some areas of medium-density housing, so I'm talking here terrace housing, not apartment housing. And they're located at the nodes, so the entries into the estate, the one at Anthony Roth, the one at Mapleton Avenue, and then down in the south at Road Station Drive. There are proposed to be key control points into Mulligan's flat. So gateways at sort of 200 to 300 metre centres, but we're not proposing any gateways along the sensitive interface where we know the superb parrot nesting. And we have created these pocket parks. So there's a hilltop park here which retains trees around which the housing sort of centres. We have another park that marks the entry from Mapleton Avenue. The key open space corridor, which will be associated with a number of wetland ponds, much like you see right down along Gungadera Creek, so that more natural environment. And then some more parks up in the northern end of the estate. Hello.
If I may ask a question.
Yes.
I can see a massive number of constraints you've got there.
Yes.
I wanted to ask if you had in mind when you were designing that, the idea of maximising solar orientation of blocks.
Absolutely. So all of the sections, or the entire road layout has basically been designed to maximise solar orientation. So all the blocks will be, as far as possible, apart from some of the little tricky middly bits, within the solar arc. We're very conscious of that. It's 20 west of north to 30 east of north is the solar arc. Outside of that, you're still going through the housing that tends to drop off a bit. And where the blocks are outside the solar arc, there's a small percentage of them. They will be the larger blocks to allow you to position your house on that block back within the solar arc.
One point about that.
Yep.
I've noticed that there's many provisions where all houses are single or two-story. What happens is that some people build a single living, and then you get a two-story next and it's higher access to the news. Two-story. People design the blocks the way some are.
Well,
especially in Utah.
yeah. You're probably familiar with the Variation 306 that went through to the territory plan, which has sought to strengthen the solar access requirements within the ACT, and it's seeking in particular to respond to that issue you're talking about, so that you have some certainty about what the person on the north is going to build. They can only build within a certain envelope, so you understand that what that will be, and then you can still have good solar access on your block. So we let the territory plan guide the solar access controls on when people come along and design their individual block design. But certainly the provisions in the territory plan, I believe, have been recently strengthened.
They were first introduced in rights in the long run, and the basis of that was that the house on the northern side wouldn't overshadow the other property more than 1 meters fence. And they've taken those provisions, and as a baby says, they've been strengthened further and applied them across the board.
Is that going to be size of the block?
We do.
They're very small blocks because no one seems to put the open space requirement. But they're technical blocks.
Those rules are governed by the territory plan, but what we have done, we've done quite a bit of work within the LDA about having a look at block size and what types of houses you can get on those blocks, looking at slope and looking at the solar arc as well. And it may be that you might be able to get a 3-bedroom house, one living area on X square metres if the place is not, but you actually need a slightly larger block to get that same house on if you're a little bit off north or you've got a different slope there. So our block sizing that we're looking at in our state development plan does respond to those concerns.
So it's not specific and say this is a single-story block.
It doesn't mandate that, no, because it still comes back to the territory plan because that is your planning legislation. Essentially that you lodge there and you get that system. But we are trying to, at this stage, make sure that our blocks provide for that range of housing and to safeguard and to not happen to soil. There's only so far that we can go in actual subdivision design. The rest is left to the territory plan. But we're trying to mold those as much as possible.
What are they? Large blocks, small blocks.
There's a range of blocks. So the smaller blocks are the compact size blocks, which are up to 250 square metres under the territory plan. So they are your terrace blocks and your sort of attached semi-residential blocks. And they really help us meet the affordability requirements that we have to meet through the SD government. 20% of our housing has to be affordable. And then there will be a range of mid-sized blocks, so they're from 250 to 500 square metres. There will probably be a majority of mid-sized blocks within Crosby because that is what the market is generally looking for. And then at the top end, there'll probably be another sort of 30% of large blocks, or I think they're called large blocks now, which are 500 square metres plus. And we've sort of got some blocks that go up to maybe 650, 700, but the majority are in the 550 range.
6,700 square metres.
It is in the current system, but certainly in the Canberra, absolutely not. But if you look at the newer greenfield developments that are being done and the sort of general demand that LDA are providing for, that's the block range.
And certainly based on that demand, a lot of it does come down to economics, and people want that size block because that is what they can borrow from the banks. They can borrow for that amount of land and then borrow for their house on top of that. Once we start going to bigger blocks, they really find it difficult to get finance and borrow.
What are the 2 or 3 selling points in the suburb? Solar limitation?
I'd say, personally, proximity to the nature reserve, I think is going to be a huge selling point. And I mean, what a fantastic facility to have that in your back door. That's one thing. I think proximity to facilities. So, as I said, you've got the light rail running up here. How wonderful jumping the bike, running right down to the light rail. Or, from this northern section, you're only 2 kilometres into the Gungahlin Town Centre. It is actually quite close. So I think that's a fantastic selling point. And I think the third one for me is the provision of open space and the sort of retention of habitat. The LDA are very interested in developing those open spaces as ecological corridors because we are next to such sensitive habitat. And I think they will be fantastic facilities for the community that lives here. Solar orientation for us is a given. We don't do anything that doesn't have solar orientation.
Yes. So what Bailey was saying about being, it'd be like a little bit like Port, I suppose, a suburb in there with the nature reserve, still proximate to a lot of services, but you've got the country right on your doorstep. And we want to, through our landscaping and our open spaces, not only retain those existing trees to give that sense of community stability, but be able to bring that nature reserve into the suburb as well.
And communications, we occupy that to know to the home in the suburb?
LDA suburbs always provide
to the home.
All good.
that's the difference.
How's it going to be in line with the plan field?
At the moment, we are acknowledging that the playing fields may in the future go ahead. So essentially, we're providing the access to the future playing fields. We're providing an edge road condition so that we have houses fronting that potential site for the future playing fields. Essentially, we don't want to bring the traffic that are going to the future playing fields to our estate. So we're trying to funnel that off as much as possible.
The playing fields aren't currently part of
So is that the grey blob or the white?
It's the white.
The white.
The grey is the
grey is the
outer
outer
protection zone.
Yeah, that's
So until the playing fields are there, we need that outer protection zone. If the playing fields happen there, they will act as an inner asset protection zone.
the OIP is there with it.
So I think you had some engineering.
Yep. I'm conscious that you've got other items on your agenda, so I won't skip through this real quick. As Abelia's mentioned, we've got a large existing gas main, which is quite interesting. To service the estate with for sewer, we're going to be bringing some connections into Harrison. The current sewer lines, the trunk sewer lines, are in this is Well Station Drive. This is the creek down here. As Abelia has already mentioned, we want to maintain these open corridors with regards to the stormwater in the creek. And one of the other major projects we have to do is actually bring in trunk water main all the way from Gundaroo Drive, or from the front of Ford, and we'll be doing a large project in March on the water main to the estate. One of the expectations I think people are going to ask about is potentially traffic on Horsepark Drive and the duplication of Horsepark Drive. That is outside of the scope of this project. However, the intersections on Mapleton, Well Station Drive and Hampshire Rock will be designed as if the road is duplicated, and they'll be designed with duplication in mind. And we're hoping when the ACT government announces its budget that there'll be some funds for duplicating Horsepark Drive. And I can't speak on behalf of the ACT government, obviously, but we're hoping it's a project that will happen, but it's not part of this estate.
The signalisation, is that your scope?
Yes, so the intersections will be built, and there will be signalised intersections, and there will be the procurement method will be different to the estate, but they'll happen concurrently.
So there's capital works projects dealt with by Economic Development Directorate, backgrounds consulting within that work as well. So we've got the integration of that from the state to make sure that size
So there's just some of the key engineering issues, and I won't bore you with with our typical cross sections, other than to point out we've got some very wide paths within the estate, notwithstanding that the new state development code requires it, but we've got 2.5 metre wide paths down the main roads, and some 2 metre wide and 1.5 metre wide paths. So to encourage, obviously, we'll hope people will walk and cycle around the place rather than use their car. And perhaps just any questions if anybody's got.
Time frame.
Time frame. So we're intending to lodge our EDP after we've finished consultation, which will be this month. It's a consultation this month, EDP lodged next month, and that will be followed obviously by DA and detailed design of the estate and construction program for the start of 2015.
So we have, in the land release program, we'll be releasing land in 2016, but we will need to start construction early next year so that they're ready for people in their pipeline.
That'll be construction for the first stage.
First stage.
So we haven't determined staging, but approximately the estate will be split into 3 or 4 stages.
There'll be smaller construction packages so that there's a wide choice of contractors out there. In some of the projects.
It's possible at this stage. Maybe more than second.
It just needs
Depends
to
on my attachments.
And the Conservation Council will be satisfied with their buffer zones.
Well, just Gundarren's strategic assessment was a process that was undertaken last year, and that went through the Commonwealth with a section by the conservation, and that was signed off at the Commonwealth level and at the ACT level. So we have our environmental approvals under ACT legislation as well, and that is what has defined the boundaries. So Throsby is actually reduced by about 2/3 to what it was originally. There may still be some concerns with certain people out there, but we have gone through, it wasn't our process, it was a certain department process, and they have told us what our boundaries are. We're working within that. There's a plan implementation team that has been set up that has various people from different agencies on that will be reviewing our work in terms of the findings of that strategic assessment. So as Abelia said, along that eastern edge where the birds do like to nest, we have to be more conscious of noise and light. So we'll get some information about exactly what that means and respond.
So the strategic assessment identifies some trees in here that are potential or actual nesting for the superb parrot.
And they're outside
And,
now.
this line here was basically set at approximately 100 metres away from the closest tree. Yeah. But that's already been demonstrated at strategic assessment.
Who's responsible for the conditional fencing for the large
So in terms of if they want to extend their predator up through fencing, that will be part of the natural zone. And from memory with the strategic assessment, those sorts of funds were investigated. We will also provide some between us and the nature zone, similar to what goes in place. And then the predator reflex will be behind that. Probably at the advanced protection zone.
And that's the good part. Anything else you can add?
No, they've done quite a bit of survey work in there. And going forward, involved in that. And the parrots, as said, they come down through that corridor and they forage right into their common. So that corridor is really important.
Head down, walking. Done all of the same.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And so you've got a copy on the machine. Excellent.
Just coincidentally, we had another report recently from Brown Consulting about the Gungahlin intersection. So at the last presentation, we had advice that the Legislative Assembly had been given a study on how to fix up some of the intersections around the eastern end of the town centre. And it's just been provided to us with possible options of improved vision, signalisation on the Hinder Edison Street intersection, the Hinder Petties site, and further to the north, a couple of other intersections up there. So we might do a summary of that and put it out just to see what people are interested in. Given our track record in getting final funding for roads activities in this area, and particularly with the advice that we get from the wife of Tony Hill, we've got a long period of time ahead of us, I think, before we get much traction on it, particularly with what's going to happen with light rail. And some of the design work I've been shown with light rail was the terminus would either be located in Edison Street opposite Central Cafe, or might do a right-hand turn and go up Gungahlin Place. Yet some of the pictures we saw, wouldn't it be lovely to have a completely covered Edison Street with open-air dining or semi-enclosed dining running right down to the library. And these are some of the issues we might have to get involved in to make sure that we have a really viable town centre that we can enjoy. Maybe do you want to cover anything that's happening with the NGN process?
Snippets I've had on to make in the last couple of weeks, there was some radio done that suggested that our lobbying to get nickels, fibre up with fibre to the home, not anything else, and may have been making progress. It's impossible to get any official statement out of the UK, but they say the lobbying is progressing well. So to you, I hope that something good will happen.
I think also much I'm a Nichols resident and very concerned about the end. I've seen some reports on the web where people have seen fibre being laid on Thule Avenue. With Nichols. So fibre there. I think
There's no question.
I think Nichols residents really want it.
Yep.
Would it be worthwhile organising a meeting with Nichols residents to campaign strong and hard for fibre to the home in that suburb?
We've already done that. We've written to the Minister of Communications. What actually happened was I heard,
sorry, but my naive question wasn't where all the back.
I heard one of our major contacts from the Indiana Code on an ABC interview with Genevieve Jacobs saying that Nichols residents will be provided with private home. I then chased up the person that usually does the presentations to our meeting and said, we shouldn't have said that because we haven't signed off on the contract instrument at the time. So it looks as though a decision has been made. I tried to find out whether KC1 was going to be included in that, and again, shutters came down. But it looks as though we're going to get a positive result in Nichols, at least fibre to the home.
That would be quite exciting for the overall Gungahlin area. All Gungahlin would be fibre to the home. That's a massive selling point.
That's the argument. And they'll make that argument that schools in the region and dog treatment, and the fact that probably the worst broadband service in Gungahlin, where we can just it's everybody.
And socioeconomically, it's probably likely to increase uptake.
I would hope so.
Yeah. Well, we're pushing the concept that we want this to be the preeminent area for fibre take up in the country, and they can really make a flag and vote about it. It means that everyone will have good access. So they've given us the undertaking that they're looking at resolving the transition process, and we're talking to people about living in that.
So the key, no one key issues for us from an Indian. Number one, second priority is to get lots of flats to that. All of fibre serving area 3 and 6 have all them lots of flats in those areas are now serviced. So we should be able to put in services in areas 3 and 6. It's around Gungahlin itself, and I think for Harrison, but I've probably got wrong and not really frank. So it's on the map, so I can be better. The town centres are really somewhat more problematic. Complex commercial facilities, or some of them city happening. But they're still working through those. And both of those are very, very important because the other thing that's happening at the moment is disconnection versus disconnecting. So even if you just want a landline, you'll have to go over to fibre service provider. It'll happen for free. Your phone company may do it, but the Gungahlin town centres buildings are in those areas, so they can't say we're going to take away your landline phone without having a fibre based place. So,
with regards to the town centre, I heard recently that there'll be Wi-Fi in the town centres soon. Service Wi-Fi, you probably need a good bandwidth.
Likely very possibly. I mean, for large scale organisations, like for example, CIT and school, they already have fibre there. Only by acid can only use by the acid. It can't be used by telco to really service like real bit. So the Wi-Fi, the example Wi-Fi project is something else I'm not. I am trying to get across that for other reasons, but I hadn't heard it become specifically, but I'm expecting. But that's a good.
So getting back to the
but
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we can do as residents now? Anyone to consult, anyone to lobby, anyone to
given that the only time I don't think so. Sure answer. There are no elections coming up. Unless you've got a week to drive, it's very hard to do that with struggle.
But we don't want to fall for people miss out at the last moment.
Well, we know the statement's already been made by a senior Indian person, and we'll keep on pressure on them to make sure they sign those contractual instruments and we'll get some
in impacts or the huge state rights. They've only had 2 of 6 reviews, so You want to be more positive than I am. It's like, it's bad things to happen.
What is the legal statement? That there's underground conduits already there?
There's nothing, the only problem is geographically, Nichols is getting it up as part of the book. There's a training government, they said stop everything, we want 6 weeks to do something. So that's why Nichols is top. Because some engineer decided it was better to do Nichols as part of the book.
If we can't get anything positive, definite coming out within, say,
So
a month,
there's nothing,
we'll ramp it up.
there's nothing good or bad about it. It's no worse than Nichols. They won't tell us the numbers, but it kind of is a new point because in areas 3 and 6, the officers that turned off, the take-up has to be 100%. Right? But the take-ups generally are very, very high in the garden, below 50-60%. But as soon as in an area starts to disconnect and it's going out, of course it accelerates very quickly again because everyone's moving.
So this thing about X-rays really a moot point because they don't really think 100%
in the end, anyway, yes. Now, what's more interesting is what speeds are they going to do? The phone lines or what's that? So Nichols and KC1, that's our number 1 priority. The second priority was getting MDUs, and they are like the MDUs, areas 3 and 6, putting under much under control, and then coming around to do the others, hopefully before they do disconnect service in the other areas. And the last part for transact migration. And I have a source inside Transact. So Transact built fibre to the premise as part of contracting LDA actually in Ford, Franklin, Casey, Grace, and bits and some other sections. And those networks, that fibre was only operated by Transact. Transact got sold to IONET, and IONET sold that fibre. NBN going out, migrating all those existing fibre to the home connections to look and operate the same as the other NBN style of service. That means they're going to change it quickly. And that means that some of the things you've got with Transact fibre to premise go away. Most specifically, make it free of TV over the fibre to the home. If you decide to stay with Transact as your ISP, Transact will give you an area, 2 areas for free as part of that process. But if you decide to go and get internet with Telstra, IONET, or some other then you'll be on the run. So that process is happening now. There's been some really confusing things happening, like people ringing up saying, I've got Transact, please move me over, and the ISP that going to says, well, we've heard of you, giving out Transact, they say we have a bulk service. It turns out it was the database problem. Transact gave NBN a copy of the database, and then 9 months later, so well, here are the updates, and then they said, you don't have any back up. They're running off all day. Didn't do that. So that's happening. And then, of course, the other thing that NBN don't care about making sure everyone knows that this connecting is happening. Because the SNs 3 and 6 have to go off.
I'm looking at the papers.
Yeah. But all right, the answer, if you think that's all happening, that's good.
It doesn't fit me, but I've been seeing it yet. So
for most people, it's not too dramatic. If you've got, if you think the NBN is internet and all you want is a phone, then you might be scared by that. But the answer is bring your phone provider and speak. That's the answer for it.
You did last month. Stepping to be a changeover. You were the first to be done before.
Right.
And quickly, they changed today at the time that things were lifted at 2 p.m. I didn't have internet up and 7 p.m.
You stay with Transact.
We actually went to IONET. But what had actually happened is we actually went to the phone as well. There was a hang up on the phone, so it didn't migrate properly, and then we actually get onto the guy, and I spent, after the fourth call, I spent half an hour with the guy, and eventually they said, oh, you have to change protocol on your modem. But it took us another 2 weeks to get a phone call in. For some strange reason, it all works right now, it does, because my wife's son put a message up on WorldCall, and someone from Internode checked it out and fixed it. There was a something dealing with the connection. They weren't opening the gate out to all the other phone companies, so they didn't even know there was a gateway to ring this phone number or ring out. Yeah, but it
Number
took us a
things
while
could
to-
go on.
Yeah. But the thing
That's
was
good
is
that it
that
was
they got it done. We ended up with 2 boxes. They actually took everything out of the box that was the outside, so that was the battery backup in the unit. Put the unit in there, and then shove the battery back up inside. And we wondered why they put it inside, and the other one was outside as well, in the box. They had a lot of problems in doing it. So that was the first one, and they were going to, that took them 3 hours, and most of the time, I was trying to be cables down the door. No, these were the guys that came in.
So
This was
there's a
the contract
contract,
guys.
contractor doing for Indian. Under the direction of transaction.
So presumably they're going to get better at this in time.
Presumably. We're actually looking at this one. No, they actually had problems because of the way housing is actually built for installations. Most of the houses in the port were built for standard installation. So now they're actually been put together installation, everything like that. They had a lot of different things. That was actually the problem trying to create. They actually had to remove tiles from the roof. They actually had to put boards there.
Some of these things are actually complicated.
But this is